And my first guest tonight, I'm very pleased to have Huntington Witherill, who is a fabulous photographer and a kind of descendant of the old school here.
A little bit. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure.
My pleasure to be
So
here.
let's just jump right in with your kind of roots here. You go back to the Ansel Adams, to the Win Bullocks, the whole classical group. So
Right, they call it the West Coast School.
The West Coast School. So let's talk about a little bit how this all came about.
Well, back in 1970, I got started in photography, and at the time, I came across a book that was a collection of poetry by Robinson Jeffers, and also photographs by Ansel Adams and Edward Weston and then Win Bullock and a number of other luminaries in the photographic world. I fell in love with that book and decided that I wanted to become a photographer. So I basically got a camera, fumbled around with it for a few months without much success, and heard that Ansel Adams taught photography workshops in Yosemite Valley. So I signed up for a workshop in Yosemite Valley with Ansel Adams and a couple of other unknowns. Brett Weston was one of them, and Win Bullock, and Paul Caponegro, and I've really never looked back since that time.
And so you, we're going to kind of go out of order here, but you were you were a musician to start out with, and your upbringing was in music.
It was. From a very early age, actually the age of 4, I started taking piano lessons. It was my intention to become a concert pianist. And I actually had a couple of concerts in my early teen years at age 14, but I found that I had tremendous stage fright, and that was going to limit my ability to be a successful concert pianist. So I decided I needed to find a new outlet for my creativity, and photography was what I chose.
So when I look at your work, maybe it's my imagination, but I feel there's a musicality to it. I see there's a relationship between, I guess it's lyrical, is I guess what the sense of it is, and structural.
Well, I appreciate that, because I do try to infuse those, those elements into my photographs. There is rhythm and cadence to the line and form that's in the photographs, and that can be very musical.
So I guess for the audience at home to have a sense of what we're talking about a little bit, I think we should let's see the first image, and let's see some images, and we'll share this with them. Here you can see what we're looking at here, and just kind of explain what we're seeing here.
Well, this is a flower called Cypripedium montanum, and they are actually cut and pressed flowers that I've placed on a painted backdrop, and I'm photographing looking straight down at the flowers on the painted background.
Wow!
So it's a still life photograph.
And this is all your work is usually a part of a series.
It is. I tend to work in series. This is from a series that's called Botanical Dances, and it was a black and white flower series. And the idea was to get these flowers to do some sort of a choreographed dance in the photograph through the line and form and the way I arranged them.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
And this is another from that same series. These are bleeding hearts, and they've been placed on a very large, actually a very small section of a very large painted photograph to use as a background. And they are again photographed looking straight down at them.
Okay.
This is from a lesser-known series called Inanimate Animals. And it is depictions of animals that, of course, aren't real. And this is a cattle head and some statues that I found in a cornfield in the middle of South Dakota. And that steer's horns are about 4 stories high. So it's a fairly large sculpture that had been placed in this farmer's cornfield. And I just thought it was so unusual that it begged to be photographed.
That was gorgeous.
Thank you.
And let's just keep rolling. Let's look at these. Okay.
This is actually looking down a waterfall cascade. Actually, the bottom of the photograph is really the top of the waterfall, and you see in the upper left there where the waterfall comes in, and then looking toward the center of the photograph is where you will see the bottom of the image. And by using a very long exposure time on the film, it actually caused the movement to happen in the water, which makes it sort of look like mountains and clouds. One of the things that's always interested me about photography is the fact that you can take a photograph of something and make it look like something other than what it really is. So
yeah, it's all composition. So where are we in this? Where were we before we go there?
That was in Pennsylvania.
Okay, let's see that. So here you've gone to color.
Yeah, now this is after I started photographing digitally and gave up film and started working strictly with the digital camera and the computer. And these are, again, photographs that are of flowers. This time they're in color, and they have been manipulated significantly from the original images within the computer, and then they're printed back out as prints. So to me, this particular approach is more like painting, or perhaps even like jazz improvisation, than it is like strictly photography.
Because if my understanding is correct, you don't know where you're going to end up. In other words, you're on a voyage of discovery with this work, which is kind of interesting, you know, from having total control. So that you
right. Well, one of the things that I learned in the West Coast School, having been taught by Ansel Adams, was the idea of what they call pre-visualization. And what that means is that when you're looking at the scene, you're envisioning what the final print that you will have as a photograph is going to be. This particular work is actually the opposite of that. It's really, you cannot have a preconceived idea of what the end result is going to be. You continue to make changes, much like when you make a painting. You will start painting and you add things as you go along, and each change causes you then to see the painting in a different light, and you will add other things and make decisions along the way. And the accumulation of all those decisions is really what really what contributes to the final look of the image.
And as you're going digitally, and again, you're working on a computer, and before we were on the air, you were telling me that you would spend 10 to 12 hours a day manipulating these images. And again, you're sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40 layers deep.
I can be.
Yes.
Oftentimes I will take, I don't keep that many layers in the computer because it's so memory intensive that it really requires a bigger computer than I've got. I tend to flatten all those layers out, as I go along. So I'll make a few moves, maybe 5 or 10 layers, and then I'll flatten them and then continue on from that point.
Do we have one more to look at here? Yes, here we are. This is to illustrate that. I mean, this is...
Yeah, this is another of the, and this is a series called Photosynthesis. So one of the things about photography for me has been that I've always tended to want to change the way in which I work. And it's one of the reasons that, because I came from such a classical background, both in music and then in photography, I've constantly wanted to kind of bring a more contemporary approach to my photography, and so that's what's led me in this direction.
Yeah, well, it's bold because people don't give up film, or they have a hard time making change, and change is so important.
I think change is important. It's one of the ways that we grow, and yes, there are some out there that do not accept digital photography as actually being photography, despite the fact that it's the predominant way that photographs are made these days. They're made digitally. Nevertheless, each approach has its own merits and its own pluses and minuses, and neither approach is better than the other. So it's a matter of what you want to say with your photographs that's really important, and how, what kind of tools you use to say it are really, in my mind, not that important.
Right, and in the end of the day, it's all back to the eye. So here's the question that always fascinates me with photography. And I have a friend named Penny Woolen, who had taught at Art Center one day, is a very formidable photographer. And I can see her, I can look at 100 photographs, 100 photographers, and her work will stand out. What is it, and your work stands out, what is it about a photograph, because everybody's got a camera, everybody thinks they're a photographer, a lot of people are passing off as photographers, but there's that something, that weird magic that stands you out of a field. And what is that about?
Well, what that's about is developing a style, a personal style for your own work, so that your work is distinctive and yet at the same time cohesive, in the sense that I would venture to say that if I could put all of my work from the beginning to what I'm doing today together and show it together, there is a common thread that runs through all the work. And for me, it has mostly to do with how I handle form and space within the frame when I make the compositions. And that kind of makes my work, when you see a landscape piece of mine, if you're familiar with my work, of course, if you see some other piece, you'll recognize it as being done by me, or more than likely being done by me, because the structures that I use in framing up the compositions are quite similar.
Yeah.
So,
and your compositions are very, again, they're very rigorous. They're very sculptural.
Thank you.
And again, I don't know if it's my imagination, but I bet that a lot of this comes from music. I don't know.
A lot of it comes from music. I think even part of it comes from the fact that I have less than optimal visual acuity. I'm very nearsighted, and so when I tend to look at the world, I look at the world more in terms of shapes and forms and how the interrelationships between the forms play off of one another. So when I'm framing up a photograph, I'm not so concerned about the finite details in the photograph. I'm more concerned about the overall structure of the composition. So it may in some ways be easier for me to compose the photographs, and I can do it more quickly and more assuredly because I'm not paying a lot of attention to the details.
Now, one of the things that I saw in your earlier work, in the black and white work, which I love,
Thank you.
is there was a sense of simplicity. Now, you don't have to be very complex to create simplicity, but there was a sense of simplicity. And then I noticed, again, one of the dangers as you go digital and you start working with what you can do, there's always this temptation for more and more and more complexity.
Absolutely.
And how do you, and when you get to a certain point of complexity, it's very hard to swim back to the simplicity. And how do you do that dance?
Well, the dance is you have to be very careful when you're using the computer. I often like to refer to the computer as being kind of like constructing Christmas tree ornaments with a chainsaw. It's a very, very powerful tool, and there's nothing that it can't do, but you really need to, use it conservatively and with some finesse. Just because you can sharpen an image or make the colors brighter or make the tonal contrast more intense doesn't mean that you necessarily want to do that. So the idea of using some self-restraint, I think, is a very important one, and it's something that I always do with my photography. I want to be very careful that I'm not overdoing things. All photographs are manipulations. All art is a manipulation. And the key with good manipulation is it's manipulated in such a way that the viewer doesn't realize that it's been manipulated. Yeah. And so that involves a lot of restraint, self-imposed restraint, which can be a hard exercise sometimes for people.
I don't know where we are time-wise, but I want to make sure that I get the essentials in. So
yes.
I want to make sure that huntingtonwitherill.com.
Yes, that's my website, and it's rather extensive. There are over 400 images from several bodies of work. There are interviews and articles that I've written. There are video productions on the site that you can see, audio interviews, that sort of thing. So it's at www.huntingtonwitherill.com. And if you misspell my name, chances are it'll still come up to the top of the list.
Okay, I want to make sure we got the business done.
Yeah.
Now, so what's next for you? Where's the work going?
Well, currently I'm getting ready to make a cross-country trip. Probably since I started photography, I've made at least 20 trips cross-country, driving cross-country, and with my wife, we're going to travel over the Great Lakes through Canada into New York, and back to Maine, where we're going to visit our friend Paul Caponegro, who was one of my first teachers and has remained a good friend for the last 44 years. And then we're going to travel back through the Southwest and photograph along the way. So I'm looking forward to, by the time I get back in November, having a great amount of new work to work on.
Fabulous.
So,
and hopefully in December, what we're talking about, or at the beginning of the new year, a exhibition of your work at the Museum of Monterey. We're looking very forward to that.
I would be delighted to do that, and I'm working on it as we speak.
We're working on it as we speak.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much.